I think that a new renaissance is going to come and beauty will just be the dominant thing. And it makes sense because, like, like there's this underlying fundamental idea of beauty that comes with a beautiful monetary system.
Hello, I am Codyellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I talk with Cain The Oricle, a freelance visual designer who has recently worked with Fedi on their launch and conference brand identity design. We discuss the importance of creativity alongside the technological and monetary revolution that is Bitcoin. We talk about the role of art, whether it is visual, writing, or music, to communicate and reflect big ideas back to society. And we also talk about how artists can be empowered by Bitcoin thinking through self-patronage and the ability to work on meaningful long-term projects and get away from the fiat grind. Now, if you would like to support my work and growing this show, please consider tipping some Bitcoin to the show's wallet. Otherwise, pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. But Cain, I believe we are wearing the same hat, so I'm sorry, one of us did it first. But is this your work or?
Yeah, I just made the graphic for Fedi and then the hats, and so yeah.
Yeah, because we met at I think we were floating around BTC Prague, and I came over and saw you at the Fedi booth. But that was where we first connected. You're an artist, visual artist, a creator, a Bitcoiner, and it was like we had this awesome conversation about creativity and Bitcoin. So I wanted to catch up with you again, man. But like, how have you been? Like, how's things after Prague? Like, what have you been up to?
Yeah, just on that note, actually, it was great to meet you at Prague. Like instant lightning connection about art, Bitcoin, and all of this stuff. It was a great connection. And after Prague, it's been pretty hectic, I would say. So I've been predominantly working on the Fedi launch, which is happening today.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's happening today. So yeah, it's been a lot of like background work, just getting the things over the line. But now, things are in place, and then, I've just been working on more art stuff, some more design stuff. I'm a freelance designer, so yeah, just, there's always things to be looking out for, portfolios to be working on, trying to secure more work, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, it's been hectic, but it's good.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that's something we can dive into today, because I do want to talk to you a bit more about creativity and Bitcoin and kind of what the opportunities are sort of for a future for creative people and artists to build and sort of share the story. And as you say, artists are the caretakers of culture, and that sort of stands out to me as really important. This kind of bigger Bitcoin movement. What does it look like? As I said, I thought the Fedi booth that I know you helped the interior design for that, the hats, the merch, the actual Fedi mints, in the small tin cases, there's just a whole sort of visual language there that you described. So, maybe we could talk a little bit, firstly, just about your work with Fedi and what you're doing with them, Cain.
Yeah, sure thing. So my work with Fedi actually began back in, I believe it was March. I hopped on like a singular project for them, which was I believe it was just the graphics for the launch video that they've created. A buddy of mine who I know, JD, brought me on to that project. Shout out JD, and he does all of the video kind of production stuff. He does that in California in the industry and stuff, and he's a Bitcoiner also, kind of channeling his creativity into the space. And so we've connected over that. We've worked on other projects together. So he brought me there. That was a great experience. Went out to LA to help out with like the shoot and stuff. And then from there, I just met some of the team, Skylar, who was the head of design at the time, and just kind of hit it off, just organically, just connected with people. I guess they needed some more design work and help for the upcoming launch. And just kind of organically grew from there. Ended up doing the booth and went to Prague. It was my first Bitcoin conference, which was great. I always talked shit about conferences before, but like there's
Not
just, you
Bitcoin
can't,
conferences. Yeah, that's
nah, man,
different.
you can't beat getting in a room with Bitcoiners and just talking, man.
Yeah,
You can't.
yeah.
And so yeah, that's kind of been my journey with Fedi at the moment. It's just great to, really support something like community focused. Um, because I know a lot of Bitcoiners have a hard time. Sometimes, they're like, oh, another Bitcoin property out the window, self-custody. But
Mm,
I don't think that's the case. Like the world isn't like a monolith. Things aren't a monolith. There can be multiple realities and things happening at once. So
yeah.
second custody, first custody, all of these options are great, you know, and so it's just been great to really support that initiative, and see the communities as well behind them. So yeah, I'm just excited to keep working on more projects and things in the space, and yeah.
And what's your creative background? So before you were working on this, I mean, you're doing freelance work. You've got a creative visual background. How did you get started with this industry?
Ooh, um, I guess the root answer of that question is I'm an artist.
Yeah,
I came out, I think I came out the womb like just needing a pen and pencil or something.
yeah, yeah,
When I was five, I used to, earlier than five actually, like about 4 or 5, I used to sit, I remember this so like vividly. I used to sit at my a kitchen table and I used to like cry because I couldn't draw properly.
yeah,
It's such a stupid thing. I would have like a picture and I would be trying to copy it and I would cry because I couldn't do it and I would just stubbornly sit there if I was trying to do it. And my mom saw that and she always kind of supported that talent in me. She sent me to art schools and things like that. And just being an artist, the reason why I'm starting with that is because you kind of have this inquisitive, curious, questioning mind as an artist. Artists, we reflect society back to itself, right? And to do that, you have to have a certain mindset where you're constantly analyzing and pulling in information so that you can like quantify it and spit it back out in some type of creative fashion. Whatever medium you're going to choose is up to you, obviously, but it just takes that mind. And, you know, it's no surprise to me that like a lot of Bitcoiners, even if they maybe don't think about themselves as creative, they're actually really creative thinkers. They are able to like expand their thinking and be really flexible and diverse in their thought and argue and battle with ideas. And so that's kind of what drew me into the space. I was just questioning
yeah.
why the world is the way it is, especially after COVID, and I went looking for answers. And yeah, just the rabbit hole just presented itself. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I made a comment recently that I found it really interesting that a lot of my Bitcoin friends and people that I've gotten to know who are not influencers, they're not, authors or anything like that, in their personal time, they've taken the effort to actually write essays or journal entries for themselves based on the reading material that they've been working through in terms of Bitcoin, economics, technology, these kinds of things. And it's sort of a synthesis of what they've read and kind of sort of playing with the ideas and kind of rehashing them and rebuilding them based on what they've learned and not just sort of taking it as it is. And I've had a number of people email me things they've been writing or been working on, just plebs, And I think I would agree with you, Cain, that sort of creative bent, it comes through. And whether it's someone who's got maybe more of an engineering kind of logical mind, who's sort of trying to solve a particular problem with, certain limitations on what is possible technically, or on the other side, in terms of the communication piece and like the kind of connecting the dots of like what is possible, what could it be, these kinds of, you know what I mean, sort of finding things in the ether and making it happen. It's a very sort of specific trait.
yeah, I 100% agree. Like, and it's funny because I actually think that, just naturally all human beings are like that. And I think those people that you're talking about, who send you these materials in different mediums, again, I think that it's maybe they are the type of people that have managed to hold on to a childlike part of themselves, despite society and certain institutions and infrastructures kind of being, I want to say unconsciously right now, built to kind of beat that out of us, right? But when you're able to like hold on to that curiosity and that vigor and that like interest in life and you go looking for answers, you can't help but wanting to play, as you said, I mean, key word you said there was play, like play with ideas,
Mm.
play with expressing ideas. And that's why I find it so interesting that, people who come into Bitcoin through so many different doors, they all, each have a like very unique perspective on this thing that's so fundamental to society, and
Mm.
that can be viewed in so many different ways. So it's really interesting to see like the way that people express Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
yeah.
along those lines, I think there is you could say sort of that childlike sense of imagination and playfulness, but I think that is tempered by more mature kind of frameworks for discourse. It's a sort of a much more holistic engagement with rhetoric or arguments or processes, which kind of the two things come together. So, being basically open-minded to things, but then also having frameworks of thought to allow you to
Mm,
process them. Because I do know quite a lot of creative people who are artists, and they're working in the space as whatever visual artists, photographers, and that, and they struggle with Bitcoin. And maybe we can get to this in a moment, but there's sort of an immaturity of the political mind, and that's much more of I guess you could say, a growing up thing, where the political mind is unable to process these ideas. And so, even though someone might be very creative and talented, without that balancing of critical thought, a history of philosophy, arguments, the ways to have a dialogue or a discourse, without that facility as well, I think it could be very challenging for
mm,
someone to kind of almost is they don't have the paintbrushes, they don't have the tools to actually do what they need to do to engage with Bitcoin, I think.
yeah. No, I fully agree. And that's why I say that like people like, who have managed to cling on to that childlike part of themselves. I'm saying that they've like intentionally or maybe stubbornly like held on to that
Mm.
because the world can be cold or brutal at times, and like, or if you just look around, you can like, it's easy to take
Just,
the black pill,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's so easy. But when you see like it's like just things happening, politics, economics, and certain things going on that just look like a shit show, and you don't want it to fundamentally change who you are, but you also want answers. Like, yeah, you go looking. But I feel like for some people, it's easier to just buy into what they've been given, and then that's how you it's like a quick path to becoming an NPC. You just kind of go along with the narrative because it's easier to not do the digging and thinking. And again, like playing, I say playing, but like stressing and really like pulling at ideas and narratives and thoughts and things. It's a lot of mental processing, and some people just maybe aren't ready for that.
yeah. Well, it's kind of it's almost hard to describe what it is because it's kind of meta. But yeah, the layering or the gyrations of thought that are required to zoom out enough to get to the point where you can sort of see the thing. When we're talking about the economy, we're talking about monetary systems. It's like, man, you don't usually get to go to the top floor and see that vista of it. And most people are just in it and they don't see it. And perhaps that's where the role of the artist comes in to help open up these gateways because you can see. I mean, we can see it quite clearly in that, but translating that into work that communicates that idea, I think, is really quite powerful. And so, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how visual culture and kind of moving forward this new, brave new Bitcoin world that we're moving into. How does that connect with visual culture, image making, storytelling? Like, how does that fit with Bitcoin?
I think again, I'm just going to kind of carry this idea forward of the people who have clung on to their childlike self. I think that, just from what you said, like people who've managed to get to that top floor to be able to look down
Mm.
and kind of get the bigger picture, the bird's eye view, right? That path is often a lonely path. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not saying you're going to be lonely in your life. You might not like all I'm saying is, and a lot of people will empathize with that. Like, you can't talk to anyone about everything, like that you're kind of thinking about, because some people are going to label you whatever, conspiracy theorist, or it's not that deep, bro,
yeah,
or that just you get brushed off easily. And again, some people just don't want to think about it because they're tired from work and all these other things going on in their life, and they're emotionally triggered and tied to things. So they just want to have a simple existence, at least when it comes to like friendship and conversations and things like that. And so yeah, like those people who get to that level, it kind of it has a weight. There's a weight that comes with getting to that level and also understanding and being able to see things. And so, like, to answer your question, I think that how visual culture like comes into that through these people is that once they get there, they want to then like share what they're seeing and the understandings or the like, summarize what they're seeing to people, um, to help them, whether it's in their immediate local vicinity or community or the greater wider world, through content or whatever they're going to do. Like these creative people, they need to be able to then translate it because they care in it. They care about people. They're usually empathetic. They're usually like deeply emotionally connected, even if they don't always express it. They feel a lot of things, and so yeah, they have to communicate that. And so that's where I think it comes in, like visual storytelling and shaping the culture through visual storytelling, because they also understand that like culture is shaped through visuals, through art, through creativity, through what people engage with entertainment wise, things that seep into your subconscious that you're looking at all the time. They understand these things. When you get to that level of understanding, you understand those kinds of things. And so you feel like there's this responsibility on your shoulders, like, okay, shit, I need to like use my talents now to contribute to the culture in a positive way because there's all of this degenerate shit. And so yeah, I need to do my part. That's why I say artists are the caretakers of culture. That's pretty
Yeah.
much my philosophy.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I sort of, I guess my journey being a creative director, doing photography for many years before I was into Bitcoin, and it's kind of strange because it's sort of an echo of who I was. I used to live in Tokyo, 10 years ago, and I've moved back to Japan recently. And, I went into the city yesterday to see a friend, good old friend who's a very creative person, interior designer, really great guy. He's almost there. I gave him a copy of a Bitcoin book to read. But it's really strange because it's a hyper mediated city. It's probably a bit like London, LA, these kind of, mega fiat cities that are kind of culture hubs, and that's where culture kind of comes from in terms of mass media. And it's really strange to walk through the city and kind of feel just how it's being corrupted. And you talk about degeneracy, and I think we can be more nuanced, as creative people, we can kind of point to it maybe a bit more closely, that I think it's this late stage, high time preference kind of, changing paradigm that most people aren't aware of, and it's just what they live and breathe. But even when it comes to the body language of people in the streets, the way they're kind of being assaulted by advertisements, and just all of the senses are being, they're under siege. And I think, okay, what is our role as image makers? What is our responsibility, perhaps, is the word, because we've seen, what this thing means, and we have a conception of what it means, but now our job is to kind of turn that into, to do the proof of work, to turn that into things that can then be taken by other people and sort of understood through those works. And that's the role of the artist always and everywhere, to do that sort of thing. It's a tall order, I must say.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very, I can see again, like just how people who realize that order, as you're saying, like it being so, I don't know, like there's so much responsibility in that.
Yeah.
I can see how some artists maybe throughout history have lost their shit
Yeah.
trying to do that because
Yeah.
they can see and people don't care what they're showing them. And it's like, but guys, like, look at this or engage
Yeah.
with these ideas or these themes. I'm trying to help you. And then they're only appreciated after they die or,
Yeah.
or they lose their shit and they go crazy and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
whole trope.
Yeah. Well,
So no, I agree. I definitely agree on that.
I think that the big difference we have this time round, because I think we can look, Kane, at some historical moments where, maybe there was a what would you say, a revolution in image making. And I mean, the one that stands out is perhaps not the best example, but the one that stands out to me is the fervor around Soviet images in the early 1920s. You know, there was this whole school of thought when this new idea came out, and they had the Communist Revolution, 1917, and then you had this whole period in the 20s, and it got cut off pretty quickly, and they had Stalinism come in and wipe out all the artists. But for a period there was a kind of naive positivity around what this could mean for, you know, the so-called working class. And I don't necessarily agree at all with that ideology, but as a kind of a moment where artists responded to a very different changing political landscape, that's very interesting. And then I think maybe one closer to home is maybe say like the 1960s. You know, you had like rock music and, you know, the whole cinema, you know, music, literature, everything changed pretty rapidly in that period. And that was also couched with massive political change, you know. And it's kind of funny because we always talk about 1971, and it's like right around that same period, right? You know, you had the Summer of Love, you had the Vietnam War, you've got, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, the kind of end of the world. You know, potentially they were like one button push away from nuking everybody. And at the same time, though, you've got like Led Zeppelin and like the Grateful Dead and the Beatles and like all of this culture emerging that's kind of responding to that changing world order. And it was like, that's still like the best music ever, right? Like, and so I wonder, you know, like what's that mean for us, you know, visual artists as well as musicians, different people? Because I mean, I'm probably a bit biased in saying it, but I do feel like we've just had like a decline in certainly mainstream culture. I mean, Hollywood, cinema, it's, you know, it's pretty clear that it's not what it used to be, right?
Yeah. Even within the last 15 years, like even let's just look at a microcosm of what you're saying, the MCU. Those movies started out great. Like that first Iron Man movie was insane, and then the second one was great. You know, like just the way they shot it. I'm not saying it's like the pinnacle of cinema, it's not the golden age of cinema, but the way they shot the superhero movie and presented the story and the writing and all of that stuff. And then fast forward to today, you know, post writer strikes and all of these different things, and Marvel just trying to pump out these movies just for the sake of money and capitalizing the idea and the IP. Like they're weak, you know, the writing is weak, everything is weak, it's the quality is degraded. And so, yeah, just to expand that back out, like I agree with you. I'm seeing that just everywhere. And to your point about, you know, you going into the city and it, you know, seeing advertising everywhere and it's like hyper, you know, sensory overload. I think that the media has also been part of that too, like part of that degeneration, you know, by controlling narratives and stories and visuals. Like we often think maybe, you know, that, oh, like the news, for example, just tells lies or false narratives. But like there's a visual element tied to that too that people like rarely think about or talk about. I've seen it sometimes on Twitter, for example, but like, you know, like when they have like weather warnings and then you see like the whole screen red and things like that, like those like subtle things, like using color and all of these different types of graphic elements and visual ways to program people have been done to people so normally, like for so long that, yeah, it's just like a normal part of life now. And so I just think that we have to be like really aware and cognizant of the fact that like it's everywhere, not just in entertainment, but it's in like everything, you know, things that we interact with on a day-to-day basis as well. And I know, again, like it's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of thinking and analyzing to do. And it's like, I don't want to think that much. Like my life is already hard. I can't pay my bills. Like I just want to create. And so there's that fine line between noticing or acknowledging and like accepting and just doing your part and creating. Not letting.
I think that's really interesting. So because we're kind of in a sense qualified to certainly unpack ideas, you know, I think we can critique things, but we can also create new things. We're in this interesting dynamic as artists where we are not simply a counter movement. You know, I think there's often the sort of the folly of, you know, say the left and the right, or, you know, this party and that party, or this kind of idea and that idea, and they're sort of set as a false dichotomy. And I think with the Bitcoin project more broadly, it sits as a kind of a non-entity. It's not playing that game, and I think that's really interesting because we are seeing a culture war play out. It's been playing out for many years. It's sort of a protracted engagement, but that's not the war we're fighting. And I think something that stands out to me, you'd be familiar with like George Orwell in 1984 and these kinds of pieces, but Orwell is a big inspiration for me. He was a journalist, he was a writer, he had like heaps of different jobs, and he actually fought in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the leftists, and he was kind of in his ideological time, he went with that, and it took a bullet, he got shot for him to kind of snap out of this ideological space. He was all in on the leftist communist thing in fascist Spain, and it took the bullet to kind of almost kill him, to sort of take him out of there and say, look, I can't be on either side. I have to be outside of it on the top floor of the building looking down. And that's where his work came from. And he talked about, Animal Farm. He talked about 1984. He did all these, he wrote all these great books. And I think for us, maybe we're in the same space where, we can impact it from the inside, but also it's like kind of from without. We have to just kind of create our own ecosystem potentially.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things in there that I wanted to respond to. Yes, I do think that eventually, like, you have to remove yourself to be able to look at the situation. But I also think that pain is a crucial part of that realization, just as you were saying with Orwell getting his arse shot just to snap out of it. There's this famous Spanish poet called Garcia Lorca, and he was, like really renowned at the time during the Spanish Civil War for his ideas, the plays that he was writing, and like they seemed kind of like melodrama kind of plays, but like they were really kind of like critiques on the institution, and eventually he was killed for them. But he was an artist, a powerful artist, a sensitive, medium, but he was in the heart of it, and he felt that pain. He saw the destruction that ideology had on the people around him, his communities, everything. And he at one point he did kind of he did kind of move away. He was outside the situation in that sense, but again, like in before all of that, like he was responding to the pain like artistically. And again, like I'm saying all of that, pain is a key element because just like Orwell and Garcia Lorca experiencing the pain to then snap them out of it, I think the same thing is happening same thing happens with Bitcoin. Like I had this conversation with someone else, DJ Valerie Love, and we were saying like, a lot of Bitcoiners come to Bitcoin through pain of some kind. They're experiencing maybe economic pain in their life or some type of other pain, some situation in their life, and they're looking for answers. And, I don't know, like, for example, COVID was a big pain point for a lot of people for various reasons. And yeah, they go looking for answers. And so I'm saying like pain is relevant in this scenario to experience. And then, yeah, like maybe it then helps you to look for answers and then step back and zoom out and disassociate from, or not even disassociate, like don't stop yourself like emotionally responding so that you can logically or creatively or respond in the way that you want to respond, which I think is important. But you have to feel that pain first. You have to feel the pain. You're in it. You're emotionally triggered, and then it helps you grow.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. So for you, COVID was a big sort of motivation for your journey to start with Bitcoin, or?
Yes. I would say, yeah. I mean, I've always been someone who kind of questioned things, the status quo. But COVID definitely was that catalyst to be like, okay, I need to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
I need to understand why people are responding the way they're responding. And so, yeah, I just went looking for answers.
Yeah, that was a masterclass because I think we're in the same boat, Cain. I think that COVID response was a masterclass in propaganda. They had visuals, they had jingles, they had phrases, they had the whole works. It was like Pavlov's dog, we had the little TV ads come up every like 5 minutes, it was like beep, 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 COVID warning, and they had
Yeah.
the 1 p.m. press press briefings with the Prime Minister, and it was just all of the visuals, and I've still got somewhere some of the artifacts, like the visual swag, like the vaccine passports, the fake vaccine passport that I was able to make, and the different, mask exemption cards and all of this paraphernalia, which in a sense is like the visual history of a global totalitarian moment.
Yeah.
And we hadn't experienced it before, man. New Zealand, I was back in New Zealand, and it was a pretty chill place, go surfing and go to the beach and that, and then next minute we got this, this thing happen, and it just like descended on the people. And I think, it was like what you were saying before as well. It was very lonely in a sense because everyone just like snapped to action. It was like, well, not everyone, but a lot of people kind of, it kind of inserted itself into people's psyches. And I mean, were you in the UK at the time or?
Yeah, unfortunately,
Yeah.
I'm working on that second passport now because I'm never letting myself get in that situation again. Um, but yeah, I was here and same. This is what I'm saying. Like that path of being awake is just lonely, and I know a lot of people know that, but that was like such a hard wake up call to that. Now, luckily, in my family, like there's a lot of skeptics,
Yeah.
so we could talk to each other about this type of stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of like friendships, for example, like man, I lost a lot of friends.
Oh,
Or
man.
I lost a lot of friends.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
damn near don't have any
Yeah.
like the people that I used to hang out with,
Yeah.
which is okay. And, people grow apart, but and a lot of it's and I could see them distancing, certain people anyway, should I say? I could see them distancing themselves when I would talk about this stuff in real time or post it on my Instagram story. I'd see them watching it, never respond to me, and then like the calls start to get less and all those kinds of things. Um, and so it's fine, at the end of the day, it's lonely, but like if you can see and you don't act, then what happens to you is your fault. And so again, you have a responsibility to do something with the knowledge that you have.
Yeah. I think it catalyzed a whole generation, and not for everyone. I mean, certainly there's people who didn't see it quite like we do, but for me as a creative person, there was just something deeply, profoundly wrong about that whole situation, and I just knew it was wrong. And despite the logic that was tried to put on the state, it had its justifications, but the whole thing was just deeply fundamentally ugly. And I use that word in a kind of in a visual sense as well as kind of a gut feeling. It's just it wasn't right.
Yeah. There was a weird sense of powerlessness that came with that whole scenario, at least for me anyway. Especially once I like, knew certain people had taken the vaccine or the shot, without any thinking involved. Not judging anyone for doing that, but I just wanted certain people like in my life to like weigh up, the facts, at least think and weigh up about, what they were doing with their body, especially in the face of like just the pressure and the consequences that they were like touting and floating in our face. First it was the carrot and then it was the stick. And just seeing the stick made me highly skeptical. And so I just wanted people to think a bit more. But the narrative had already been set in, as you said, it descended upon their psyche and they'd been infected with that virus, and so they were just acting on fear and
Yeah,
emotion.
and I think this is where perhaps the positive side of the story comes through, Kane, because again, as trained artists, I think both of us understand the role of image making, and for I guess for our colleagues and our friends who are maybe more engineering or logical minded, or I guess you would say left brain people, who follow maybe more of a sort of a sequential process. They don't necessarily see what we see. That images can certainly change the way you feel about something. There's a reason that stop signs are red and go signs are green. And I think being able to work with the semiotic language and the signs and the graphics and the photography and the images and the storytelling, there is an opportunity for us to create I don't know, even want to say a movement, but to create a balance or a response, but without responding, because it's not left and right again. It's not yin and yang. It's like we're kind of outside of that dimension. And I'm just wondering, what does that look like? Some people would call it like culture jamming. The classic one would be like Banksy,
Yeah.
which is kind of like, maybe people are familiar with Banksy, sort of like street art, kind of asking questions. And a lot of that stuff is like quite provocative, but I don't know, what do you see in terms of like how we respond without responding to this kind of stuff?
This is an interesting question because okay, there's two things I want to say to this question. The first is, and going back to your Orwell example, um, short anecdote. I grew up in like theatre schools as well. So my mum sent me to theatre schools, and I went to an arts high school. There was a theatre part of the high school, and for my graduating play, we actually did Animal Farm, and I was one of the pigs. And so before we started like playing, before we started actually rehearsing the lines and playing the play, we would sit down and have read-throughs and break down the text, ideologically, narratively, in just various ways, right? And one of the things that we spoke about, I remember, was just kind of how absurd it was that Orwell was telling this story through animals, and it's something that you just don't expect. Like, you don't expect to get delivered a message of totalitarianism and the warning of the state through animals, and then it being such absurd animals as well, like the pigs being the ones in charge, right? Like, and then it's funny because like when we were playing it, I was like snorting and oinking and stuff like pigs, and we had like hay bales on stage and stuff. It was stupid, but because it's so absurd, it gets through. Like the delivery system is so unexpected that it gets straight through your psyche. And then after a while, for example, like, the audience in the beginning were laughing at us, the ones who were playing the pigs snorting and stuff. But after a while, let's say about 15 minutes into the play, they're not laughing anymore. Like the snorting, they get over the snorting and the oinking and the walking around like a pig.
Yeah.
They're invested in the story.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying this because I think that like part of what the visual delivery system needs to be is absurd. And it makes sense to me right now anyway, like that a lot of media that we see is absurdism. Like it kind of is close to Dadaism back when Dadaism was coming in, just, around like the war and all of that kind of stuff happening. It's a breakdown of society, but then these absurd ideas get through in such simple and silly ways, like memes and things like that. Because it's just, first of all, it gives you that kind of lighthearted feeling of it's not so heavy to deal with. And then you're able to then, I guess, ascertain the deeper meaning and narrative within that. Like it pulls you in, and then you can like really like take your time to really think about and explore it through this lighthearted delivery systems. Trojan horse. And so, yeah, I think that like a lot of messages and stories and things that will need to be delivered will be done through simple means. Not to say that it's going to be the only ways, but like very absurd, simple means. I look at like TikToks that go viral and things like that these days. There's I forgot the account name. It's these like teenage kids, and they make these really weird dream-like videos, like fever dream videos. It's like a guy might pop out of his couch, and then the camera spins, and then it's a swimming pool. This guy like hopping out, and it's just really weird videos. And there's a lot of content like that I see like the younger generation interacting with, like Gen Z. And I think like, yeah, like it makes sense like why that absurdism is kind of rising again. And then they talk about these deeper things within
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
content.
That's fascinating because the absurdism you talk about, it reflects back onto, I guess, the dominant strain, which is also absurd. We call it clown world for a reason, and it really, like, it's like, what is even going on? You can only laugh when you've got these presidential people and like politicians and like business leaders, and it's just like insanity. But there's no logical system to it, and I think maybe that's where a logical person, or perhaps say a normie, so to speak, their thought process breaks down because they're trying to do the mental gymnastics to make it fit. And that's exactly
Mm.
what Orwell talked about, that, I love the party and 2 + 2 = 5. I know it equals 5. I believe it. And that defies all logic, but you make it work on the software of the brain somehow, and that's where we've gotten to with the culture war, I believe, is that it's like people are
Yep.
just making it, they're doing something to make it work and to make it make sense.
Yeah.
Um,
And yeah, you can only laugh at it. That's the thing. You can, but then this is the thing, like the other side. So the second part that I wanted to say to this was, I think that once the absurdism like runs its course and people get burnt out and they want to move from, the 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 chaotic times created by weak men into the stronger times. Like I think that beauty takes over, and so this is why I personally feel like a new renaissance will happen, will come. This is something I mentioned to you like at the conference. I think that a new renaissance is going to come and beauty will just be the dominant thing. And it makes sense because like there's this underlying fundamental idea of beauty that comes with a beautiful monetary system, I mean, look at like Florence or Renaissance times when they had the Florent and things like that. Culture could just expand and new beautiful things could just come out. When the people were left to their own devices, not just in Europe, in various places around the world, like when they were left to their own devices, beautiful parts of culture came out. But then, of course, like it degenerates over time as people within the culture like start manipulating, and there's hierarchies and oligarchies and things like that. Like Maya is a perfect example with human sacrifices. You have this ruling class and kind of putting a spell on the people. It eventually degrades, but like this is why I'm saying like Bitcoin, I think, is gonna facilitate beauty again because it's immutable and it will facilitate people being able to express themselves, which is something you mentioned to me, like artists being able to fund themselves just by hodling into the future and their purchasing power going up, and then they'll be able to focus on creating beautiful things again.
yeah.
Um, so
That's
yeah.
that's incredible, and it's almost like you read my mind because I was going to say the absurdity. I think that the kind of the two poles of that are there's an absurdity in the kind of the memes, which I love the memes, but then the other side of it is the authenticity, and the kind of one book that really stands out to me. I don't know if you've read it. Is The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and everyone quotes Atlas Shrugged as the kind of libertarian kind of economic objectivism, her philosophy. But actually, her other book, the Fountainhead, which is the story of this young architect, Howard Rourke, and his dream to create just profound, beautiful buildings, and despite what everyone else was saying, and it's kind of like a real relevant story, I think, for creatives. It's like, how do you stay true to the kind of the muses that are speaking through you to
Mm.
create your work? And what you're saying around this new renaissance, I can see in the background you've got a painting you're working on. It looks quite beautiful, and I've seen some of your other work online, and there's like certainly a rediscovery of beauty, truth, these kind of ideals that maybe we have forgotten in this late chaotic modernity that is like just kind of ugly, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Without being too judgmental about it, because I want to also, we have to understand where it's come from. It's not the people as such. It's like the sort of the underlying foundation that has led to this
Mm.
kind of state.
Yeah, and I just on that point, I think you're just making me realize I think there is nothing wrong with judging. I have a hard time with that concept too sometimes, and I think you just clarified it for me. Like you're judging the root and the actual essence of it and not the people because the people are in it. We're in it. We're not perfect. We're gonna do clown stuff sometimes. We're not operating our best selves all the time. And there are times where we get caught up in things too. But at the end of the day, like we should be able to violently call out the thing. Um,
Or just call out.
and
We don't have to be super violent about it. I mean, I think non-aggression. But I mean,
yes,
we can be loud about it. Let's put it
yes,
that way. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah. No, all good. And I mean, I think as well, I've been reading Eric Kayson's book, Crypto Sovereignty, which is quite profound, and I really respect the way he uses language. He speaks to the certain class of language that I am familiar with, a lineage of the study of images, visual culture, media studies. You know, he's sort of, his book is in that space, and he's talking about the state, and this is a concept which most people struggle with, the difference between the government and the state. It's like, well, these are the guys I voted for, here's the buildings, this is the physical manifestation, but there's this kind of conceptual layer of the state, which kind of is the power structure that kind of comes down and is able to orchestrate through its human actors. It can execute sort of physical violence, it can lock people up in quarantine hotels, it can force them to do this and that. But the nature of the state, which if you go back to the histories, the ancients, the Greeks, the Romans, they talk about this, because you can have a state that's, situated in a place of good, kind of righteousness to it. But then you can have one that's also decaying. And I mean, there's just some really interesting, I think, opportunities now to engage with this kind of discourse. What is the state? What is the nature of power? What is the nature of relations between people? Questions which can be quite challenging to think about, but with the new technology of Bitcoin, you suddenly have, and that this is kind of the theme of crypto sovereignty, is that you can be crypto sovereign. You can't touch my shit because I'm secured by the Bitcoin blockchain, and it just changes the dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that, what's that quote? Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome.
Yeah.
It's if you're reliant on the system, just like the human actors, as you're saying, through the government, or not even the government, that the state works through, then if you're reliant on that system, you're not going to jeopardize your place within that system if you're doing well, and you can see that other people are doing objectively worse. And so yeah, it's just it's a weird one, because I think anyone is susceptible to corruption. We are,
Yeah.
we're people at the end of the day, but now that we have a vehicle, as you're saying, that we can operate in a different way, in a different manner, with different philosophies and fundamentals behind it. Like, yeah, there are bound to be different outcomes that come out of that,
Yeah.
and it's just inevitable.
Yeah. What do you think? Because I mean, we referenced the Spanish Civil War, 1920s communist art movements, and the hippie movement, and these kind of different periods of time where there's been sort of a visual culture that's been associated with a political movement,
Yeah.
or change. But how do we sort of understand what our Bitcoin project is going to be like, or how it is emerging? Because we know what doesn't work. The hippies failed, like it didn't work. The communist artist, kind of idealist, proletarian worker thing failed. They all got sent to Siberia, like in the gulags. Like it didn't work. And so I wonder whether there's not a sort of wisdom that we all are aware of in this project, that those political trappings aren't the answer. And so I mean, I'd love to hear what you think, but it's like we kind of have learned from the way other movements have tried to do things before, and it's like, okay, let's not try and do it like that. We're sort of focusing on different things, perhaps.
So wait, are you saying, just to clarify, are you saying that even those like the artists who got sent to the gulags, they were part of that learning too?
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is they failed. Like they produced work, and it entered the historical record, and it became relevant to the changing society, but the movement ultimately didn't achieve the vision that they set out to achieve. We never got the communist utopia. We never got the hippie, peace and love. It was like, that changed pretty fucking quickly. And I wonder whether, as Bitcoiners, there's just a bit more of a reality check, a bit more astuteness, where we are like, yep, we can't play their game. We're not going to go and protest. We're not going to do the sit-in and any of that stuff. We're going to take all of the learnings and we're going to do it in a way that kind of goes from the inside out. And that's kind of what I'm feeling it's doing. It's an economic thing. It's not, you don't have to even believe. You will believe eventually, but it's just pure economics, right?
I think, okay, now I understand what you're saying now. And It's funny because I think that it's already in motion. I think the difference with those examples that you laid out was that they were ideas, they were ideologies, philosophies, politics. At the end of the day, they were ideas, right? But they weren't backed by anything. They weren't backed by anything decentralized. Like an idea can be decentralized, but then you can use methods to snuff it out or at least limit it or suppress it in a way that it may not like spread beyond certain borders.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying that because I think Bitcoin is different in that it started with hardware and software at the same time. And the system, the network was allowed to quietly grow and become decentralized enough to the point where it's hard to snuff out now.
Mm.
And yes, people always, we're always talking about like code is speech and an idea is hard to kill and things like that. But like this is tied in, it has the physical component to it. It has the real world tether, which is, the mining part to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like that happened, like that layer of infrastructure for this idea, because the fundamental idea is like, equity. I don't want to even say equity, but just what's the word I'm looking for? Truth, maybe like truth in the
Mm.
sense that, it's verifiable, backed by this software and hardware network. Like now things can be built on top of that. The art can be tethered to that. The language can be tethered to that. Like the ideas can be even written inscribed in blocks. Like
Yeah.
it's just something that can't be touched in the same way. You can destroy art, but you can't destroy the ledger as easily. So it's just like
Yeah.
there's that part of it, I think.
I wonder if maybe this is something I have spoken to others about previously, but I wonder whether maybe the more apt analogy is looking at the emergence of Christianity. And this, I think, is something that's quite profound for, the history of Christ, and then, eventually, the persecution. And then eventually you had like the Holy Roman Church and like the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope and, these kind of, in a sense, I mean, there's kind of a sort of historical detail there, but this kind of ragtag thing kind of eventually decentralized itself, and it just kind of dispersed, and it flippened the kind of situation so that the Romans who killed Christ ended up being the Roman Empire that was eventually Christian, and the whole Christian world. And the analogies with that, you've got like the truth, the word, the kind of new system. It isn't the Carthaginians or the Egyptians or some other kind of established foe. It's like a new thing from within, and certain
Mm.
people get it, and their eyes light up and they understand it at all layers. Because there weren't any hippies in the presidential suite during the 60s. There weren't any commie artists in the inner chambers of the Politburo, and so they were always outside of it, and so they were useful for a while, and then when they weren't useful anymore, they got done away with. But once you get it, it's like there's Bitcoiners all the way at the top, all the way at the bottom, throughout. It's like you can't really snuff it out.
Yeah, I agree, and it I feel like it's like there's like a certain recipe that needs to happen for it to be successful as well. Like I feel like there needs to be some type of historic tensions and struggle as well, and then there needs to be this powerful idea, and then also going back to the idea of Bitcoin having this physical layer and the non-tangible layer. Like Christianity had that same thing too. The church had a monopoly on the printing press, and so like the good book could be printed and dispersed. That
Mm,
was one of the only books peasants had for a while,
yeah.
and so they decentralized that thing in a physical form, and it had time to proliferate. I think it's similar in that way.
Well,
Uh,
it's also interesting because the history of art and Western art. I was in Vienna after I met you in Prague, and went to the Belvedere, Upper Belvedere Art Museum, and they've got the history, 15th, 16th century art, or even earlier stuff, early modern art, and it's all Christian. It's like they're all going on about the same thing, and it was like, man, it must have had a big impact. And I just wonder, this kind of paradigm, which is hard for me. And I mean, I'm sure I'd love to explore this a bit more in the future, but like, what did that mean, to suddenly go into this whole new to have a whole new way of thinking about your relationship with eternity and like God and, capital G and these kinds of things, which maybe didn't exist in the same way. They were kind of a bit more fiat, to put it lightly, maybe, this sort of, you pay a God and he's going to do this for you, and you pay another God and he's going to do that. And it's more transactional. Like, I mean, not to make this too theologic, but like, I just wonder, yeah.
No, please.
Sorry.
No, I was saying, please, like, make it theological.
Yeah, well, it's just sort of like, I think maybe that sort of describes why this has this kind of energy to it. Like, why is it that we do this stuff? It's not coming from a place of sort of selfishness or resentment, which I think maybe, say, for example, the communist movements and these kind of projects, they come from a place of resentment, and they sort of masquerade as, and the current culture war, the wokeness, the left-right thing, that's all coming from there as well. It's taking from others because I don't have, or it's like sort of pulling others down. But I think the Bitcoin movement, this kind of Bitcoinism, which I sometimes refer to, it's like it's trying to bring everyone up, and it's like we go out of our way. I literally did an hour and a half on the train to go and see this guy yesterday and hang out with him and just kind of talk through, because he's almost there. He's got the goods. He's just hasn't lit the fire yet. The kindling is all like laid out, ready to go, and it's just like, hey, what would it mean to just activate that idea?
Again, I mean, not to, I'm not wishing ill on anyone or anything, but maybe it's just there's a pain. Yeah, pain. Like there's certain, maybe he just hasn't seen something yet that he needs to see. There's an element of it that like you just get it at the time you're supposed to get it at. I know they say everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve from an economic standpoint, but like I really think that's the truth when it comes to even just your life circumstances. Certain scenarios or situations might happen, and they don't have to be drastic. He might even just look at something else in his local community and he instantly gets it. But you've helped him because as you said, you've laid the scaffolding. So I think let life do what life does. Just keep being.
You lead them. You share the word, but like everyone, and you can't. I mean, at the end of the day, that's a Bitcoin thing. You can't force people to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some really profound values here, and I think what I'm excited about, and again, talking with you and our other friend who did the Natamoto project, who you introduced me to, there's this kind of slowly emerging group of people working on this stuff. Tip, who does the music, does the rapping and talking about Bitcoin in kind of the lyrical sense. There's all of these people who have come around this idea, who are sort of giving it a go and kind of exploring new space. And then I guess the final piece, which we discussed in Prague, was what I call self-patronage, but this idea that we can sort of fund ourselves in the future with the Bitcoin today. And I think this is something that really stands out, where artists are kind of always having to hustle, right? They're always having to make concessions, and it's quite stressful as well with kind of the whole AI question. It's like, that's probably going to remove your economic ability to sell, commercial work, but it doesn't mean you can't create art. And so we talked about self-patronage, being able to pay yourself in the future with Bitcoin today as its value increases. But like, how do you feel about that idea? What are your thoughts on that, Cain?
I think it's where we're going. I think, I'm not a fortune teller. I can't see the future, but I think just with the trajectory that Bitcoin is on right now, I think it's a reality that people will live, even if it's maybe not us. I know sometimes like the revolutionaries want to live the revolution, but sometimes that might not happen. But if it is, that'd be great. And I obviously hope that's true. But I think the stepping stone or the moment before that is first getting the gems and the value from Bitcoin in the understanding of money, and understanding that having even just better financial practices goes a long way. Because I've learned a lot of just how to, for example, it's given me like lower time preference, for example, right? Or at least the awareness of it. But without like doing that digging and stuff, you can't get those concepts and you can't operate in a different way. And so yeah, I think the step before is getting those concepts, implementing it into your life, giving yourself a financial base, or understanding that you need to have a financial base, your legal trap, as I like to say, like, pick something maybe like there's different ways to make money as well these days, with the internet and things like that. So find what works for you and give yourself that like legal base, um, or foundation, and that will allow you to like start working towards and clarifying your vision more and more and more. Because I know there's certain artists who aren't entirely clear on their vision as well. Um, and as you do that, like over time, hopefully as well in your lifetime, like Bitcoin will appreciate and allow you to compound that momentum that you're building,
Mm.
from concept to being fully funded off of Bitcoin. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think it's that process, right? Getting those concepts, starting to work and clarifying your vision and producing the work, as you said, proof of work. And then by the time that like Bitcoin could fund your life, you're already in flow, you're already in a state of doing it. You didn't wait for Bitcoin to appreciate for you to then start being able to express yourself because life isn't promised to you. Life isn't promised to any of us. And why would you wait your life to express what the muses are channeling into you, right? Like,
Yeah,
just do it. Bitcoin or not,
just do it,
if the
man.
vision that you have is strong enough, you need to find a way to service that vision. And so it might be you putting your ego to the side and getting a 9 to 5 or at least a part-time job or something that you don't entirely like doing while you figure out how to make money in better ways to fund your vision. Like service your vision is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think the service of the vision, respecting what you've been given. The muses have chosen to speak through you and to give you this, this talent and to ignore that. Before you maybe had an excuse. It's like, well, you got to put bread on the table. It's like, what do you do, Cody? What's your job? These questions I get all the time, and I'm like, man, I don't know, but somehow with the various things I'm doing and the various people I meet and that it's all coming together and it's creating value. We're entering a brave new world. It's an exciting world. You've got things like value for value coming along where, you can, people can support you and you've got other things like our friend Mick with Geyser doing the crowdfunding using Bitcoin. There's all these different things emerging where artists and creatives and anyone can sort of support work where the incentives are aligned in a much more truthful, beautiful way. It's not going to be
mm.
relying on the ad clicks and the impressions and these kinds of things. So I'm excited for the future, man. I think it's going to be really, really awesome. I have just one more question for you though, in terms of your practice. Is there anything you're working on at the moment or a bigger piece that you're sort of heading towards in terms of what you are wanting to create or put out into the world?
Yes, just leading on from that last question, or answer rather, like about vision. I feel like I have clarified my vision. I don't want to like say too much of it because I just want to do it. But I can tell you the concept of it, and it's kind of loosely related to the stuff behind me. You see these huge canvases that I have here, like I'm gearing up to service it on a bigger scale.
Okay.
And for me, that basically is expressing. So, okay, there are various rabbit holes that you go down when you find Bitcoin, right? Because it's this fundamental monetary thing, like, and money is like the base layer of everything, and it goes into everything, religion, blah blah blah. This is why I actually think, there are parallels between religion or how Bitcoiners are perceived and religion, because the only thing we've seen, or the things that we've seen in history that have so closely mirrored this is like things like Christianity, as you were saying, right? And so as I said earlier in this conversation, like Bitcoiners come from all different walks of life and we express such different things because it's such a fundamental thing that we're dealing with when it comes to humanity. And so for me, as a person of Caribbean descent, I'm very interested in like my lineage, like, ancestral stories and histories and things like that. I find it like really fascinating. I did like DNA tests with my dad and stuff, and we found out like a lot of our DNA is from Nigeria region. Um, and I've always had this interest in like the older spiritual systems. And so I did some digging into that, and I found this system called Ifa, and it's basically a West African spiritual system and philosophy and way of life and sort of pseudoscience or science or mathematics in a way that is basically it's uh, it's a system that is composed of 256 principles. I swear to God,
Oh, man.
my mind was I swear, man, this is just the top of it.
Yeah.
256 principles or rules that explain different situations, every situation in the universe. Like, so they look at the universe as a matrix or a sandbox, a code, and there are these 256 rules that can explain various situations and within this matrix, right? And then they look at like, so the Orishas, they call them, they're like, they're in different spiritual systems that got carried over from West Africa to like the Caribbean and stuff in like voodoo and Santeria and other spiritual practices and religions. And they're basically supposed to be these numerical kind of representations of like the fundamental forces of nature that like govern the matrix that we're in. So like there's concepts for like, the wind and things like that. They're not actually gods. They are, I don't know if we were looking at it like a computer program, they're like lines of code in the program that have specific
Functions. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm really fascinated by this entire thing. And I'm like, there's concepts of decentralization and like speech is code and the transmission of like code as speech and all of these things. And I'm trying to now visually represent this entire like rabbit hole or system in like paintings by layering them up. And so, yeah, that's basically what I want to be expressing through my art, what I'm going to be expressing through my art, what I'm working on now. And yeah, I just can't wait to show people this different Bitcoin art. Because right now it's a lot of like techie stuff and I love it. I love all the stuff that's coming out, but I'm seeing more of a lane of this type of stuff. Bitcoin Apex is someone who gets it.
Oh,
He's doing it from
yes.
his vantage point as well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
that's what I'm seeing. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, man, because I know it can be quite personal to talk about stuff like that because as we said earlier, it's easy to lose yourself in such a project. And I know certainly for me, my writing and some of my other work and the experience with COVID earlier and these things we discussed, they go pretty deep, they cut pretty deep. And, I wish you all the best with that and happy to chat about it any time offline if you ever want to talk about it because it is hard. We don't just go to work and come home. It's like it stays with us. We're on this journey to understand what this thing is, but it's pretty exciting. There's a lot of good people along the way, a lot of good vibes, and yeah, man, all the best with that. I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you very much, man. It
Cool.
was a pleasure to talk to you. And likewise, doors always open. And I'm just excited to see what you create as well.
Yeah, sweet, man. If people want to follow you, Cain, they want to check out your work. Where can they go?
You can follow me on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter at Cain the Oracle. So it's Cain the and then Oracle spelled Oricle.
Yeah, man, I'll throw some links to that as well in the show notes. But hey, man, I really appreciate your time, and I mean, good luck with that, and let's keep in touch.
Likewise, man. Take care.
Cool. All right. Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Codyellingham, and that was the transformation of value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.